Hello BookTube, my name is Elizabeth. Welcome to my channel, Bouquets and Books. This is a weekly reads video where I will talk about what I've read this week. And that is about half a gazillion books. I may be exaggerating. I am exaggerating. The first one that I finished is The Odyssey by Homer. I finished it on the 24th because there are 24 chapters and I read one chapter a day starting on January 1st. So, I don't know if you can see, there's a lot of glare there. Yeah. So this is a gorgeous book. It's a gorgeous version and I highly recommend it. It is the translation by Emily Wilson. As you can see, the cover is gorgeous, but it also comes with a very interesting introduction. There are maps, there's a glossary at the end with indications to the pronunciation of the names, which is very useful. And the translation itself, it is in iambic pentameter. And it is very readable. At first I thought that the fact that it's in verse would make it more difficult, but in a way, it doesn't get in the way. It doesn't really read like a poetry. If it had been all printed like in complete lines, like prose, I wouldn't have noticed that it was in iambic pentameter. It really reads very, very well. Also, the language that Emily Wilson uses is common language for today. She doesn't try to give it an older feel to it. So she's using not necessarily everyday language, but modern language. So that makes it very readable, very understandable. So it's a wonderful read. I do recommend this translation if you're interested in the Odyssey. As far as the comparison between the Odyssey and the Iliad, the Odyssey feels much more modern. It's about a single subject. It's about Odysseus. The story is more compact, more concise. It is closer in structure to something we would see today. It opens at the palace in Ithaca, which is the home of Odysseus. And we see that his house is more or less invaded by suitors who want to marry his wife because they think that she's a widow. And then the son, who is about 20 years old, but he's treated as a child, is going away and trying to get some help. And on his way back, the suitors decide to ambush him. And then the camera changes, and then we move to Odysseus, and where he is, stuck in the middle of the Atlantic, the Mediterranean Sea with Calypso. He is all alone, his crew has died, and he is praying to go away. Finally, one of the gods listens to him, which is Athena. She hears him, and she's helping him go away, escape from Calypso. And Odysseus finds his way to a friendly place that I forgot, whose name I forgot. And in the friendly place, he tells what happened. He tells his story. So that is where we learn about all the adventures with the Cyclops, with who else? Charybdis. It was in English, but of course in my head it sounded in French. Charybdis and Scylla, I think. And Calypso, of course. Oh, and Circe, and all the other adventures that he went through. So, and then he comes back to Ithaca finally and faces the suitors and saves his wife in a way. So all of this feels very, very modern. So compared to the Iliad, it feels more modern. But for me, I preferred the Iliad. I think it's because I preferred the characters in the Iliad. Odysseus in this book is very often referred to as a liar, a schemer, not necessarily somebody who is trustworthy. As when in the Iliad we have noble heroes like Achilles and Hector and Agamemnon, Ajax. They are all wonderful men, as in this, Odysseus is perhaps a bit less of a savory character. But so all of this to say that I preferred the Iliad, even though it is not quite as well constructed, I preferred the Iliad. Another book that I finished, and I don't have a physical copy because I read it on Scribd. It is a romance called Beauty and the Beast by Sarah Howell. Is that it? If that's not it, I'll correct it in the editing. But I think that is it. And it was just okay. Nothing more than that. It's a funny thing. I love to read romance. I enjoy them when I read them, but I have a very hard time finding them good. I have a hard time saying, this is great, read this, because I always find flaws in them. It may be because I'm not reading the best ones. I choose them pretty much at random because I don't really, I don't listen to other people's recommendation in a way. I read what's available on Scribd or at the library or things like that. So I may not be reading the best ones. In this particular case, there were two main problems. One of them is the main basis of the story. That is that the man, the hero, is compared to a beast. He considers himself ugly. He thinks no woman will like him. He doesn't trust women because he's so ugly. His ugliness is that he has a mane of red hair and that he has battle scars. That's it. So it's not very credible to begin with. And anyway, the woman he's more or less forced to marry, and the poor girl, she's more or less forced to marry this man. She likes him from the start. So the story should end after 50 pages. But of course, they find problems for themselves. Other people create problems for them too. And at some point, there's a character who had been absent for the entire length of the novel, like 3/4 of the way in. Suddenly the character appears. Here I am. Oh, where have you been? Oh, I was there. And that's it. No other explanation, just like that. And that made no sense. So these were the two main reasons why I thought this was just okay. It did the job. I was diverted. I was entertained. It did the job. But I cannot say that this was great. So that's the romance that I read. And then I went into nonfiction. I read Pastoral Song by James Rebanks. I think it's my favorite book I've read this year. This is a memoir. I know I don't read a lot of memoirs, but this is a memoir about a farmer. James Rebanks is a farmer in England. The book is in 3 parts. In the first part, he talks about his childhood, how he learned about farming with his grandfather at his grandfather's farm. That was at the beginning of the 1980s. And his grandfather's farm at the beginning of the 1980s was already an old-fashioned farm. Nobody really farmed like that anymore. That meant it was a farm that was not that big, and that was made up of a multitude of small fields. I think he says that it was divided into 40 different fields. And each field was used for something different. In one it was for sheep, the other one was turnips, the other one was barley, the other one was for cows, all sort of different things. And of course, every year they would rotate. They would change the place where they put the potatoes or something like that. And then in the second part, we see what happened from the 1980s on. That with the advent of supermarkets, mainly, with their push to buy enormous quantities of food at very, very low prices, little farms like that could not survive. They had to adapt. And the way to adapt was to become bigger, and it was to specialize, to ultra specialize. So they would end up producing a single thing. So either they became dairy farms, or they became pig farms, or they became barley farms. But they would use the entire land they had for a single purpose. The problem with this way of farming is that it exhausts the land. It's not true that you can plant corn, let's say, year after year after year after year in the same field, because each plant requires different nutrients, and by planting always the same crop, you empty the land of a particular type of nutrients, and it becomes useless after a while. And so basically he was saying that it was a catastrophe for nature, and also with the advent of these single crops or single produce farms, there was also a rise in the use of chemicals, of pesticides, of chemical fertilizers, and various things like that, and it was a catastrophe for nature. So he was a bit comparing the situation before when he learned with his grandfather that when they plowed, they were always followed by a flock of seagulls because they were attracted by the worms that were left behind. And now he noticed that in these new fields that were artificially green in a way because they had been fed with so much fertilizer that it was almost glowing, that there was no bees, there was no birds, there was nothing in these fields. They were green deserts, basically. So that brings us to the third part of the book, where Rebanks is now in possession of what was his grandfather's farm after it had become his father's farm. Now it's his farm, and he's trying to bring it back to a more natural state. He's trying to bring back a variety of species in there. He's trying to bring back nature to where it was before it was completely crushed, I guess, by humans. So it's all told in a very interesting way, very engaging way. It's not very long, it's 300 pages, but they're small pages, printed big. It reads super well, and I found it extremely compelling. It made me question the way I buy food. I don't think I will buy meat from supermarkets anymore. I will strive as much as possible to go to farmers markets. Now, of course, I live in Canada. That means that winter is very long, and if you want vegetables, you cannot necessarily buy fresh vegetables all year long. Sometimes you have to buy vegetables that are imported, and for certain things like cereals, I don't think it's even possible to buy cereal that does not come from a giant company, that doesn't come from a giant farm from the West. There are some small farms that are producing mainly organic things, but I think they are somewhat difficult to find. But I'll look, at least I'll look. So what I know I will do is that I will buy meat from a local butcher instead. So maybe the local butcher does not need to buy 10,000 pigs at a time. He can buy just a few pigs at a time or a few cows at a time from a single farmer, knowing where the animal came from and what the animal ate, and hoping that perhaps my teeny tiny small contribution will make a difference. Now, of course, I finished reading this like 3 days ago, so it's not like I can say this has changed my life, because it's been 3 days, but it certainly made me more aware of where I buy the food, where the food comes from. And there's a lot of talk at the moment that food prices will go up this year in 2022. And I think it's right that they should go up, but they should go up for the right reason. And I don't think it's going to go up at the moment in the supermarkets. It's not going to enrich the farmers. I think it's just going to enrich the large corporations. So I'm ready to pay more for food as long as the money goes to the right place. And that means the farmers' pockets. So yeah, this is for me a very eye-opening book, and I recommend it to everyone. Pastoral song. It was published under a different title if you are outside of North America. In the UK, it was published under the title English Pastoral. So yeah, that was me. Next, I read Miss Dior, A Story of Couture and Courage. Now, this book, depending on how you approach it, is either very successful or a total failure. For me, it was the second option. The reason is, I thought this was a biography of Catherine Dior. Because that's what it says at the back, that's what it says on the flap, and that's what it says in the opening chapters. So I thought this was a biography of Catherine Dior. That would be the little sister of the designer Christian Dior. However, Catherine Dior basically disappears from the book in the middle. So it's hard to consider this a biography. Now, I have many thoughts about this book, so I filmed a review. It's not posted yet, and I have not rewatched it yet. I'm afraid it's just complete total rambling, so I may not post it. But just in case it's not total rambling, I will not repeat everything here. I will just leave it at saying, I was disappointed because I thought it was a biography. It is not a biography. For this book to be successful, you have to approach it as the picture of a certain period, as life in the 1940s in France. And in the concentration camps too, because Catherine Dior was a member of the resistance. She was arrested. tortured, and deported to a concentration camp. So there's a lot of chapters that are about what Catherine Dior went through in the concentration camps. Then again, it's not so much specific to Catherine Dior. The author uses material from other women, other survivors who told their stories from the camps. So we have more a general portrait of the times than a specific account of what specifically Catherine Dior went through. And as I said, when she comes back, that's about the middle of the book. When she comes back from Germany, apparently the author loses interest in her. She's mentioned only in relation to her brother's work as a designer, as a possible inspiration for the brand Miss Dior. But other than that, her life is not explored at all. So if you want to read about that murky period of the history of France, the 1940s and the early 1950s, where on one side you had people who suffered immensely from the occupation, from the German invasion, and on the other side, people who want to ignore whatever happened, who are trying to put everything under the carpet and ignore it and forget it as soon as possible. People who want to go back to a life of leisure, to a life of insouciance, of luxury, of couture, then it can become a very interesting book if you want to see the contrast. And also it's a gorgeous book. The book itself is beautiful. It is full of pictures. Of course I won't find an equal. There we go. Here. So it is full of pictures. 1/3 of the book is pictures. So it's quite a lot. And it's printed on beautiful paper. So the object, it's a beautiful object. But as I said, if you're expecting a biography, you'll be disappointed because that's not it. But if you expect a picture of the times of what life was like back then, well then it could be very successful. You could like it very much. So yeah, so that's Miss Dior. And what else? I read something else. Oh yes, for Reading Africa, we follow the Africa Cup of Nations that is actually being played in Cameroon. At first, my team was Guinea, so I read a book about a Guinean author set in Guinea. And then Guinea lost to Zimbabwe, but was not eliminated. That was in the first round. It was still a round robin. So I read a short story by a Zimbabwean author. So that was last week. This week, Guinea lost to Gambia, which is a teeny tiny country, which is the first time Gambia is playing in the African Cup of Nations. It was the lowest placed team in the tournament, and they lost. So I had to read a book by a Gambian author, or about Gambia, I should say, which is what I did. I found one on Scribd. It is called One Plastic Bag by Miranda Paul. It is a book for children. It's a picture book. And it is about how one woman, one day, she took notice of all the discarded plastic bags that were just polluting the village and were becoming dangerous because the goats were eating it, and it just made the village look dirty. And she wondered what she could do about it. And one day she had a very good idea to how to reuse these plastic bags. So this is the story of how she started this little recycling project of these plastic bags. And it's a beautiful book, and it is available on Scribd. The problem with Scribd is that there was some sort of formatting problem. For some pages, there was text that was overlapping. You had like 2 lines, one above the other, and it was impossible to read. So it's not perfect, but I got the story, and it was very cute, very charming, and it made me travel to Gambia. So that is the last book that I read this week. I am still reading Portrait of a Lady. I progressed a little bit. I am now at about the halfway point, about page 300 and something out of 600. I don't know if I like it. It is well written. The characters are interesting. However, we are at a point where I can see that one character is manipulating another one, and I hate that. I hate characters being manipulated. I hate when people are being manipulated. I don't like it. So I don't want to read it. In a way, I don't want to read it. But in another way, I want to know, will the person notice that she's being manipulated and stop being manipulated? I'm afraid that she won't. I'm terribly afraid that she will fall into the trap and just be miserable for the rest of her life. The other thing that I keep noticing is the more I advance, the more I'm convinced that the narrative voice, the narrator, whoever that is, does not like the main character. I think that's why that trap is being set for her. I don't think the narrator likes the main character, and I find that a bit odd. So I have to keep reading just to know if I'm right or not. So I'm going to keep reading very slowly. I hope I'll finish it by the end of February. Yeah, I'll let you know what I'm thinking of it. So that is it. That is what I've read this week. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books, if you think you want to read these books, or what you've been reading this week. Thank you everyone for watching. I will see you in the next video. À la prochaine!